Good evening. My name is Robert Steinbaum. I'm Associate Dean for Advancement at Rutgers Law School in Newark. It's my pleasure to welcome you to a fireside chat with Professor David Troutt, one in a series of programs celebrating the 75th anniversary of Rutgers University, Newark. David Dante Troutt is the Distinguished Professor of Law and Justice John J. Francis Scholar at the law school. He's the founding director of the Rutgers Center on Law, Inequality, and Metropolitan Equity, abbreviated as CLiME. He teaches and writes about race, class, and legal structure, intellectual property, torts, and critical legal theory. He's a graduate of Stanford undergraduate and Harvard Law School. Professor Troutt is here today in his role as an engaged public scholar. He founded CLiME in 2011 in order to provide a research resource for students and the public interested in the growing challenges of municipalities and families trying to sustain middle-class outcomes amid growing fiscal constraints and rapid demographic change. The center's work has directly led to Mayor Ras Baraka and the City Council's formation of the city's Equitable Growth Advisory Commission, of which David Troutt is a member. His work exemplifies Chancellor Nancy Cantor's commitment for this university, that is Rutgers University, Newark, as an anchor institution of the city of Newark, together with city government, New Jersey Institute of Technology, Essex County College, the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, Newark Public Library, and the Newark Museum of Art, and as well the Newark Alliance and other institutions. The university has engaged in systemic intervention to improve the city's experience for all its populations. Our moderator is Shante D. Palmer, Vice Chancellor for External and Government Relations at Rutgers University, Newark. In this capacity, she serves as one of the chief strategic and administrative officers of the institution and advisor to the chancellor, as she works to develop and implement the major anchor institutional goals of Rutgers Newark and engage in government and community relations while setting legislative priorities for the campus. Vice Chancellor Palmer came to Rutgers Newark last year, having served as Director of Government Relations at Montclair State University, and prior to that, as Senior Vice President of Business Development at Capital Impact Group, where she counseled and provided on-the-ground support and management of multi-state public policy and advocacy matters for the consulting company's large corporate clients. She has served on the staffs of Senators Cory Booker, Jeff Chiesa, and Frank Lautenberg, and at the outset of her career as a compliance specialist with the National Labor Relations Board. She's an alumna of Essex County College, Montclair State University, and received her executive master's in public administration from Rutgers Newark. Now a word of housekeeping. Please note all attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of the discussion. If you have questions, please send them via the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. We will get to as many questions as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, for that wonderful introduction. And good evening, everyone, and welcome to the new generation of Fireside Chats, coming to you virtually from the comfort of our homes. As mentioned, I'm Vice Chancellor Shante Palmer, and I will be your moderator this evening. I'll mention again, please feel free to submit questions during the discussion using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So I'm very happy to host this conversation with distinguished Professor David Troutt, who I have known and I admire and have worked with for many years. So let's get started. I will focus our conversation on CLiME, its origin story, and it's how it established itself as one of the law school's first centers when it began in 2011. And being that we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of Rutgers University, Newark, I will also ask how CLiME's mission aligns with the anchor mission of the university, the public scholarship of the center, and the center's groundbreaking reports that translates directly to informed policy recommendations that serve the public good. So let's begin. First question here. Welcome, David. As we go back in history to draw the lines to today's Newark landscape, can you reflect on CLiME's origin story, its philosophical mission, and how it has changed over the last 10 years?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And it's, as always, a pleasure being with you. Just yet another great conversation in our relationship over these many years. The origin story has changed for CLiME. CLiME, we've mostly from a kind of operational standpoint and in thinking about how to effectuate the mission. So let me start with the mission. The mission has really always been to operate at the intersection of legal policy and policy in order to address in a robust way problems of structural inequality or place-based inequality and systemic racism. So that's what we're concerned with. And the idea is that the university, beginning with the law school, but in an interdisciplinary way, has resources available, intellectual and otherwise, to contribute to sometimes radical, but hopefully innovative and occasionally transformative thinking about change in issues that have really plagued marginalized people for a very long time, many of whom live right here in our own front, back, and side yards in Newark. And so that's really, it really has almost a civil rights advocacy origin through public research. How can the research that we're able to do, within the resources of the institution, contribute to different outcomes, lasting outcomes in the community of which we're a part? And so in some respects, it's the essence of the anchor mission. In other respects, it's really an opportunity for a law professor, advocate, to utilize the resources around him to try to make an impact beyond traditional scholarship. So that's really the origin of it. And it's changed a little bit over the years in the model itself. We have always used affiliated faculty in other departments. We've always been project-based, and we've always utilized students from the law school and from other departments as fellows to actually do most of the work of the center. Mm-hmm. The last thing I'll say is, when thinking about this, the idea of place-based inequality or structural inequality is really a theoretical idea. The theoretical idea is that place has become very much the repository of difference in terms of outcomes, in terms of resources, in terms of access. And so while it is incredibly important to remain steadfast in our attention to race, ethnicity, gender, and other markers of difference, of individuality, and of marginalized status, this country has moved beyond a kind of a rights-based orientation that protects those interests to repositories of affluence and concentrated poverty based upon where one lives. And the way it functions as a theoretical matter, the way that access to resources or access to opportunity or the lack of access to opportunity or resources works is through institutions. The resources available for housing policy, for law enforcement, for recreation, for economic development, for education, et cetera, the rules by which those institutions operate, and the practices that lead to various outcomes. So as a research institute, it's important for us to zero in on those institutions, to zero in on the norms, practices, and rules that guide them, to pay close attention to disparities, and to highlight as a causal matter what produces disparate impact and how, most importantly, we can think about change.
Absolutely. So how does that mission align with Rutgers' North Anchor mission and the push for public scholarship?
Oh, I think it's really a perfect alignment. I mean, we've been very fortunate because I was sort of working through some of these ideas, having been an advocate before I came to law teaching long ago. And, you know, obviously traditional law teaching doesn't really give much of an opportunity. There are plenty of people who do exactly what I do from a traditional legal scholarly standpoint at universities across the country that may or may not have any interest or curiosity about the surrounding world, let alone the surrounding neighborhood or the city in which their institution is based. And that wasn't me. I was really energized by Newark. I was really energized by the region. In fact, when I started CLiME, I moved from Brooklyn to New Jersey so that I can be closer to the issues that we'd be working on. And then when Nancy Cantor came on as the vice chancellor, you know, all of a sudden, my theory of structural inequality was sort of magnified in a theory of anchor institutional work. And my theory of how we would do scholarship that had real impact with and for the people around us was then actualized in her work on publicly engaged scholarship, public scholarship. So it really was quite fortuitous that that these threads came together at the time that they did. We're not the only ones. There are a lot of really terrific public scholars at the university who not only engage the tools of traditional scholarship, but who work with stakeholders, who partner with community-based organizations, with government, with private sector entities, et cetera, to help drive the agenda of what they're researching. And so in this marriage, you know, there's a real intellectual give and take about what needs to be looked at and why. But the ultimate outcome is you know, the shared goal is impact. We're not just doing it knowledge for knowledge's sake. We're doing it because we deeply believe that outcomes can be improved through this combination of resources.
Absolutely. Can you discuss the operation of the center, how projects are chosen, and who does the work? How does it all happen? How does the magic happen?
Yeah, that's a good one. You know, we've looked at a lot of different issues, and some of the issues have been generated by the interest of student fellows, and some of them have been generated by work that I've done or with colleagues. And so it's kind of an interesting mixture of sources of inspiration. But as a general matter, what we're trying to do is really focus on conditions of extreme marginalization that have defied easy solution, and also, as a practical matter, to rely on our strengths. So there may be issues that we would want to look at that we don't quite have the resources to look at, and even if we work as we do in an interdisciplinary way, we may not be able to reach effectively. And so those issues get tabled as important, but not reachable in the moment. But, you know, I was thinking about some of the things that we've done. AntiPoverty Work, which goes way back for me, revealed some interesting little nuggets that wouldn't ordinarily come to a law professor about, for instance, psychological trauma and complex stress,
right,
disproportionately experienced by low-income people in some of the very places, the marginalized places that we look at. And this appeared to be a driver of inequality that I had missed. And then it became a question of, well, what are the institutional inputs to these horrific experiences and all that they do to people to in many respects kind of rewire, if not really affect people's adaptive neuro mechanisms to affect life expectancy, to influence whether or not they're addicted, and then that plays out in all sorts of public health problems that we know as discrete ailments like diabetes or heart conditions or other kinds of diseases. And so, in other words, what I was discovering was, through psychological trauma, another set of consequences of structural inequality, and specifically of segregation leading to concentrated poverty, to the dearth of resources in certain communities, where people all too often were experiencing community violence, domestic violence, all sorts of traumatic events that were having profound psychological impacts on them that would then eventually become physical impacts on them. So it would affect them in schools, it would affect them in the job market, it would affect them in terms of rates of incarceration, and it would affect them all the way down to life expectancy.
right.
And so we wound up looking at psychological trauma, but the institutional connection was to schools. So we were looking at children and their exposure to traumatic events, and what, if anything, schools could do about this. Schools being the one place that all children have in common, and that sort of formative experience for building resiliency or not. So that's one example of the kinds of work that we've done. And we've done a lot of work in housing. We've done increasing amounts of work in equitable growth and gentrification. We're also looking very hard more recently at issues involving small business development, the importance of wealth accumulation through means other than just home ownership. And then finally, we can't ignore the pandemic. And so we have a project, an ongoing project called Colored by COVID, in which we recognize the disproportionate rates of infection, serious illness, and death caused by the virus in Black and Brown communities, especially in Essex County, but across the country. And the question is not, why do so many more Black and Brown people succumb to the disease, or why have they? But from a public health standpoint, we know that, right? We know it's because they have underlying conditions and they have public-facing jobs at a higher rate than others. So that much we sort of know, but what we don't know is why they have so many underlying conditions. I mean, why the rates of comorbidities like diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, and I'm forgetting what the other one is, and of course the gateway hypertension, why these predominate in these communities at such rates? Why are they so untreated? Why are they so poorly managed, so that these already vulnerable populations are so particularly fragile to the latest public health shock, which in this case happened to be this deadly virus? So we've been looking at that as well. And then the last thing I'll say about this is, once we do this sort of interdisciplinary research on the underlying substantive problem, be it psychological trauma or underlying conditions, or housing insecurity, or the lack of affordability, and the risk of displacement through addiction, et cetera, what is it that, after looking through the lens of all these other disciplines, that law can bring to it from an advocacy standpoint to produce better outcomes?
Right. Wonderful. Wonderfully said. So let's discuss the collaborations, the centers, at the centers and your work in Newark, the center's work in Newark. What is the scope of issues and projects CLiME has been involved in?
Oh, wow. It's a lot. It's been very interesting. You know, we've been really fortunate to have a good working relationship with this mayoral administration under Ras Baraka. Excuse me. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the work in Newark began with a request by the mayor for some assistance in thinking about how Newark, poised in 2016, 17, for all this new development, sort of as a hot area for commercial and residential investment. You know, how do we avoid being, as he put it, the next Brooklyn? Of course, I took great offense to having lived in Brooklyn for many years. But you know, he was right, and it's a real concern. And we've learned much more through our research, just how prescient his concern was. And so it began with a report on gentrification and the creation of a gentrification index, which we call the DRIM, or the Displacement Risk Indicators Matrix. And in a couple of weeks, we'll release the latest update of that, because it's based on about 10 variables that sort of squished together, give you an idea of where gentrification may be occurring in the city and where people are at greatest risk of being displaced as a result of rising prices. And we meant that to be a policy tool, along with a bunch of other recommendations, including the recommendation that we really shared with the mayor on the creation of an Equitable Growth Advisory Commission. Mayors have a lot to do, and you know, they have limited capacity, especially in a city like Newark, and so they can use the resources of committed, smart stakeholders, of which there are 14, and then there's me on this commission. And so we meet regularly to look at a whole bunch of issues, and sometimes the issues need informing from CLiME. So one issue, you know, was the right to counsel or the assistance of counsel, and CLiME wrote a memo that advised the city on how to construct its counsel, its free counsel for indigent Newark tenants facing eviction, and the creation of what became the Office of Tenant Legal Services, with, I should add, a brilliant Rutgers Law School graduate at the helm, Kabira Myers, who runs that shop at City Hall. Later on, as we moved into land bank issues, you know, the commission advised on the land bank, and CLiME did separate research on how best to use a land bank, as Newark has, for vacant and abandoned properties owned by the city. We confronted as a commission and as a city the issue of affordable housing. It's a real problem, much greater than anyone knew. We discussed it with a kind of a general sense that people in the city were being priced out given their limited means. But we didn't really know the dimensions of the problem. And so we did a report that came out just before the city began policy making on the issue, called Homes Beyond Reach, in which we did a full comprehensive affordability gap analysis of just how many affordable housing units were needed in the city and at what price. And we determined that affordability for Newarkers, not for people in Essex County broadly, but for Newarkers, was $750 a month, you can imagine. And that's based upon the fact that Newark household incomes among renters is very, very low. It's about 30% of area median income. It amounts to about $33,000 a year or so. So what's affordable for someone, for a household making that much money, is actually $750 a week. To meet that need in the city of Newark, you would need more than 16,000 new units, right? whether we get 16,000 units or not, what was important about the effort was that we had helped to inform the policymaking discussion. It's very hard to act on your impulse to bring about affordable housing without having good data, reliable data that uses appropriate benchmarks to come up with whatever policies that you then will pursue. And lately, we're trying to help with the amendment of the inclusionary zoning ordinance, because like many of these IZOs, you want them to be more than symbolic, but they break down in the machinations of the market. And often your ordinance is only as good as your strategies and capacity for implementation. So, after several years of experience with it, we're trying now, among the other commissioners and many other very capable people, to help the city to come to, a more effective place in the ordinance. And so these are the kinds of things that we've been doing. And, it's sort of an endless list.
Right. So how do you think about scholarly impact? What's your process? How do you think about, what do you think in regards to scholarly impact?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, it's hard, it's hard. I mean, I think all scholars of whatever stripes, public or otherwise, hope that their work, that people work so hard on will have public impact. I mean, even those brilliant people who crowd at the head of a pin over some really small appearing issue of science have the imagination to recognize what the implications of what they're doing has for the greater world. And it's part of an academic's imagination. It's part of what draws people to this sort of work. It's really quite beautiful. And yet one thing that is almost always out of the control of the academic is where the work goes and whether it will have that impact that they often quietly to themselves imagine and only occasionally and sheepishly share with others because it seems, so out of reach. So the role of the public scholar is to try to think about how to overcome that, right? How do I do this work in a way that might just bring about necessary change? And I think that the key ingredients, although nothing is guaranteed, the key ingredients are to work with lots of smart people who are not academics, who have given their lives over to the risk of impact, right? The hope of impact. Public servants, advocates, organizers, people who day in and day out just care very deeply and hope through their persistence and by doing their jobs responsibly that good things will happen. You have to work with those people. You have to listen to those people. You have to see those people as your peer, even if those people don't have a PhD or whatever. And I think you have to try to tailor your work in a particular way, not that it transgresses academic standards, not by any means, but that in its values, that it recognizes that when public impact is part of the goal of the work, that you may have to think about strategy a little bit differently. And some of that strategy has to do with dissemination. I mean, we live in a world in which anybody can suddenly become very popular for, the most brilliant idea or the stupidest expression. And fame is sort of for the taking. And I imagine that's some version of public impact. The challenge for us as public scholars is to utilize the technology that's available to us now, these various means and social media, et cetera, to try to get the word out. Because I think that going back to the very origins of what it means to be a scholar, you have to reach the discourse, you know, but you have to reach the public discourse, not just the discourse among scholars. And therefore, the dissemination of your work is critically important. And trying to figure that out is a bit of a tough nut to crack because it's a little unusual. It's not how we were trained, you know, and so that's then when the role of the university kicks in. You know, what does it take to get the word out? What does it take to engage the discourse in meaningful ways, not silly ways, not ways where people sort of take a little nugget of it and run with it and distort it and exaggerate it and make the whole thing seem foolish, you know, by the time it reaches public consciousness, you know, not for the sake of mockery, but for the sake of depth and real discussion. You know, that to me is the challenge. And I'm still working it out.
So, what have some of the greatest challenges been for the center? And what is difficult about doing interdisciplinary public scholarship?
Well, one of them would be, you know, collaboration is difficult. You know, and I think everybody knows this. You don't have to be a public scholar to know this. You know, collaboration is sort of the watchword. Everybody wants to collaborate until they actually have to collaborate. And then they realize how difficult it is to, you know, to deal with other people's priorities and personalities and, you know, and their pace, you know. And there's so many opportunities for misunderstandings and miscommunications. So that can be a big one. Resources, that's a big one. You know, when you do the work, you realize, especially when the sort of work that we're doing on behalf of, you know, populations disadvantaged by so many institutional practices for so long. I mean, we're really looking at some of the worst of what American society can do to people, you know. You're up against all of that, which is a kind of a resource mountain coming at you. And it's very hard to counter it with anything like equal or opposite force. So we are always operating in scarcity. You know, we don't necessarily need an army, but you know, we could use a small militia of people, and it's hard to do that. It's hard to fund it. It's hard to organize it. It's hard to make it work, you know. So that's another one. You know, those are the you know, and I suppose I should conclude this answer with, you know, when you produce scholarship for scholarship's sake, the attainment of standards helps to achieve satisfaction. When you pursue public scholarship for the sake of public impact, where the impact is transformative change on behalf of people who have really struggled in the same world in which you operate, the failure to produce that kind of impact, like any advocate knows, can be disheartening, you know. And so, you know, there's some of that too as a difficulty, you know, in answer to your question. You know, as a consequentialist, you want the consequences to change, and when they don't, it's you know, it's exhausting. And you got to keep hope. You got to keep hope alive.
Keep hope alive. So on that note, what are some of the successes CLiME can build on? Keep it positive.
Well, you know, I don't know who said it. It might have been James Baldwin, but you know, we look for recognition. Especially where it's been denied. And so to have our work recognized as good work, because it is hard work, it's going to be hard work, whether it's good or not, right? You're going to put in the time. That's great. And, you know, we've been very fortunate, you know, with some of the things that I just mentioned, you know, with the affordability analysis, which we then extended beyond Newark, and we've done 10 other cities, showing similar dynamics. You know, a lot of people don't think that poor places are not affordable for poor people, but they are. And so there's an affordable, I mean, most of us are experiencing an affordability crisis, but people in Camden and Atlantic City and Patterson and Trenton are experiencing a crisis of affordability, just like people in Newark, even though many people outside those places might not assume that housing would be so unaffordable. So I think our work there has resonated to some extent, and we're helping to change the conversation, and that's important. I think you know, as I mentioned, the work in right to counsel and preventing evictions is a work in progress, but we've made some gains there. But we've got our hands in a whole bunch of I guess fingers in a bunch of pies. Nobody wants to eat the pie with a bunch of hands in it, but we're trying, you know, to think much more about equitable growth from an economic development standpoint, from a wealth accumulation standpoint and participation standpoint. We're trying to think about what it means to be a legacy city that has experienced all the marginalization that a city, not a household, not a person, but a city can experience within a region, within a state, within a country, and learn some of the lessons of Newark and its efforts toward equitable growth on behalf of similarly situated cities around the country. So I think we're seeing some success there. We're seeing success basically on the accumulated knowledge that this journey has brought those of us working in CLiME, and we're trying to grow that family and join others doing similar work around this great university, because there are a lot of them.
So really quick, I know we're almost at the time for Q&A, but what's next? And that's a really big question. You can make it as simple as you want, but what's next for the center? What's next for CLiME?
That's a good question. You know, everything that we do yields new questions, you know? So you talk about housing and you talk about jobs, you necessarily start thinking about ready, willing, and able businesses run and owned by people of color in a city of people of color, and the importance that is to the city as part of its mission of equitable growth, to the residents as part of realizing their city, you know, as full economic actors, right? And as the employment base on the demand side of things that is crying out over every single issue that we look at. But then, you know, as just came up in a conversation today, okay, so we've got a dozen housing issues, and we've got a dozen equitable growth, economic development, you know, minority business, small business, entrepreneurship, participation, procurement issues over here. But what about transportation? You know, I mean, we are place-based, right? That's part of the mission. What about transportation? And so this is just sort of an example of how you go from issues where you've demonstrated some strength and expertise, either because you had it or you acquired it in the course of the work, to others where you built it through interdisciplinary relationships, to others where it's simply necessitated by the nature of the work that you're doing, right? And I think that that's the dynamism of intersectionality. Everything that we're talking about is a version of intersectionality, because what we're essentially talking about is the different ways that people's lives and livelihoods and well-being interact with multiple institutions that have the power, again, through their norms and their rules and their practices, to either confer opportunity or to retard it. And so the growth of CLiME's work is only limited by our imagination to recognize those connections and to try to put together the resources to study them effectively.
The future sounds promising. Thank you for that wonderful discussion. We're now going to turn to the Q&A portion of this event. I'm going to start with a few questions submitted during registration. And the first question is, how do you connect with community organizations that do equity work?
Well, a lot of different ways. One of the main ones, I mean, we'll get cold calls. People will reach out to us, and you know, so some of our partnerships have started with, you know, a friendly email inquiry. Some of it exists through, say, pre-existing relationships that I've had, just as a civil rights lawyer. Like, I'll work with Fair Share Housing Center. Some of it came out of the work in Newark on, you know, for instance, the work on right to counsel connected us just almost organically with a bunch of housing organizers. And work on foreclosures before that had connected us with a different set of housing organizers. Work on the commission has connected us with the wonderful Newark Community Development Network, which is many, many different organizations, some of which have been operating very effectively in the city for, you know, 30, 40 years, right? I guess some of them now up to 50 years. So there are a variety of ways. It's project driven, it can be issue driven, it can be fortuitous, or it can just be through continuing work and all the folks that gather on that issue.
How do you define metropolitan equity?
That's a good one. That's a good one. So I'm really glad you asked that. You know, so metropolitan equity as a definition goes to the heart of a lot of the work that CLiME did really from the outset, and that's why it's in the title. But when you think about place-based inequality, you really have to imagine that there are have places and have not places, and then the question is, you know, across what landscape? And the landscape is really not, as a legal matter, just neighborhoods by neighborhoods within a particular city. You know, here's a poor neighborhood, here's a rich neighborhood. Yes, there's a relationship between the two, and it's very important, but the most powerful relationships, the ones that really have the most consequence for the distribution of opportunities across a state, across a broader population, across a nation, have more to do in our legal system with jurisdictional boundaries around municipalities. And so metropolitan equity refers to the map of municipalities and the different kinds of institutional resources that each can command, right? So we're looking and comparing Irvington and Orange with South Orange and Milburn. And we're seeing, these are Essex County municipalities, we're seeing tremendous metropolitan inequality of tax-based resources, of the quality of schools, of all sorts of public services, of the opportunity for wealth creation through home ownership, on and on and on. And so the notion of metropolitan equity being concerned not just with outcomes, but with the process by which, the fair process by which outcomes are achieved. Metropolitan equity work reminds us that we are constantly comparing because these jurisdictions have a relationship to each other. You know, they don't just exist as islands. They have a real relationship to each other, where one keeps out multifamily housing, where one refuses to open its doors in an inclusive way to certain kinds of people that it has forever, through its land use policies, deemed undesirable. Another welcomes, but disproportionately. And the weight of those obligations falls unfairly on one and not the other. So one enjoys a premium and the other experiences a tax. And that you can see played out across New Jersey's 565 municipalities and across much of the country. And so it was the origin of a lot of the inequality, the place-based inequality that CLiME has looked at since its inception.
What is the most effective approach to address inequality in public education?
Oh, geez.
I'm sure that ties in with the metropolitan piece as well.
So the short answer is I don't know. You know, it's a really tough one, and it's you know, it's been, you know, I describe this work as institutionally based, and education is a critical institution, particularly when it comes to conferring or retarding opportunity, right? And so we see dramatic differences, again, as a matter of metropolitan equity, between what is possible educationally in certain districts and what is possible educationally in others. Now, obviously, what is possible for any individual student is determined by myriad factors, so many of which are internal or family-based. That's another institution that has a big role to play. But you know, we sort of come up at drone level, you know, a couple of thousand feet up, and look at structure and determine the allocation of resources as educational resources, which don't just go to what's in the school building. They also go to what's in the homes in terms of educational attainment of parents and median income, and whether people are insured against catastrophic illness, and whether they're at risk of certain kinds of things, whether they're frightened of crime, whether they're frightened about the risk of displacement through eviction or something like that, whether they're afraid they'll get shot if they leave the home and walk the wrong way. So all of these things bear upon educational outcomes. But you know, the short answer, as I've gone on for some time, the short answer is that inequality is reproduced by these, by the disparate allocation of critical resources based largely on where one lives, but also on who one is. And so the solution lies somewhere in trying to rectify that imbalance, to curtail the hoarding where it occurs, to embrace a more meaningful and organic notion of diversity, to believe as a policy matter in mutuality as a core value in achieving some notion of fairness, and actually caring about fairness as if we each have privity in the social contract. That's really important. Beyond that, you know, this is an incredibly complicated issue, or set of issues. And so, you know, there are smaller, more discrete areas in which we can achieve, you know, some of the things that I'm talking about. We have not looked as deeply at education, partly in deference to the work of some of my colleagues who do focus on education. But from the standpoint of structural inequality, you know, I hope that's at least a good partial answer to why we have the disparities that we have and how we should approach overcoming them.
Thank you for that. So the next question will come from the Q&A submitted by Kay Anderson 1, who is very excited to see and hear you again, Professor Troutt. So he wanted to ask your view on the impact of Black intellectual prosperity, given the current combination of police killings, COVID, unemployment, and the other ills affecting our community.
All right, I want to go back to the relationship between Black intellectual prosperity and those ills. Did I hear that?
The impact of Black, in parentheses, intellectual prosperity, given the current combination of police killings, COVID, unemployment, and other ills affecting the community.
I mean, it's I'm not sure. You know, I'm not sure. Prosperity is the was that the term that the questioner used?
Posterity. Yes.
I mean, I'm.
Yes, the term you use.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that if the essence of the question, yes, posterity, the essence of the question has to do with whether or not there's a distance, mm-hmm. Or I'm not sure. Is it, I mean, it might be an interesting question about posturing. You know, it might be an interesting question about, you know, a kind of, you know, argumentative positionality among Black intellectuals along those kinds of issues. I'm not quite sure how to take it. I'll say this, you know, I think that we struggle to be inclusive in our analyses because there are realities of which we're not always aware, and yet we do run the risk as Black people generally, but as Black intellectuals of being spokespeople where we really shouldn't, you know, or where we, you know, should qualify our answers. On the other hand, we're allowed our outraged reactions, you know, to what appear to be insoluble issues. And one set of reactions that I think Black people have to the problems that the questioner raised is just overwhelming grief and anger about police brutality and about, at least in the early going of COVID, the disproportionate deaths in which we felt that we were being singled out again, you know, for fragility, that other people could stay home and be safe and locked down. And we folk, our folk or kinfolk had to go out and, you know, suffer exposure to this virus long before there was a vaccine. And then just die of these horrible deaths alone in hospitals. And so, you know, I want to be mindful that people are generally doing the best that they can when they react. And I want to be mindful of the fact that many Black intellectuals like me feel a tremendous responsibility in trying to reason through these reactions and these issues, to get as much knowledge as we can, but to get out there and to have a real voice, lest that voice be ignored, you know, or overtaken by others. So I'm sympathetic to the dilemma of, on the one hand, speaking too much and too far about things one no longer knows about. But on the other, the visceral reaction, the visceral grief reaction that so many of us as Black people feel when we see, injustice, whether it comes from the knee of a cop to, the protein spikes of a virus.
Yeah. We have a question from Diane Crothers, who asks, how can Rutgers Newark alumni get involved in your work? And what would you like to see from alumni?
That's a great question. And what it really does is it sort of shines. So here's a difficulty that I didn't speak to earlier. And I really appreciate this question because there are so many resources out there mm-hmm. that we don't fully utilize. And one of them is our alums, and I experience this all the time. I mean, at the law school, I spent a few years chairing the Minority Student Program Faculty Committee during the period before and after our 50th anniversary celebration. And it was an occasion to engage much more with alums, some whom I knew and hadn't seen in years, been here a long time, some whom I never met. And oh my God, it was really, for somebody who's not sort of a big reunion person, it was really, really inspiring. I mean, I really enjoyed. And I came away so glad that I had that opportunity, but I also was kind of kicking myself that I wasn't availing myself of these folks and their resources, and I was sort of ivory towering it, inadvertently. And I feel that way about this question, that there's got to be a way to bring folks in, not just to tell them what we're doing, but because they're out there doing these things. They are potential partners, right? They're certainly sources of information. They ask great questions. They know about stuff we don't know about. They have insights that would be really remarkably helpful. So I'm just going to take that as a friendly suggestion to get my act together, and put that on the list of things that we need to figure out how to do. And we have a wonderful project program coordinator who can probably help me figure out a way to not only get the word out to alumni, but get the word out in order to solicit the conversation so that we can be in correspondence. You'll know about things that we do, and then we'll try to figure out venues to bring you in, virtually or in person, so that we can strengthen this relationship, because it can only redound to our mutual benefit. It's a great idea. Thank you for asking.
Well, David, I just want to thank you for this phenomenal conversation and for taking the time to give us all the phenomenal background and details on this center and the work you've done over, the last 10, 11 years. So I appreciate you. I'm certain everyone on this Zoom and beyond appreciates you. And I thank you for taking the time. So that concludes the Q&A portion of this fireside chat. Check out the fire, you see the fire? So I don't know if you wanna say anything else, David, but I'll give you a couple seconds if you do.
I wanna thank all the organizers. I wanna thank Rob for his very nice introduction. And Shantae, I just wanna thank you so much. Your friendship has meant so much over the years. What you're doing for the university right now is absolutely critical. And and I remember that we worked together way back, when you were doing your master's and working with CLiME. And so you helped to build what this is, and I'm very grateful. So thank you.
I appreciate you, David. And so on that note, I'm going to turn this back over to Rob so he can provide us some closing remarks. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Hey, thank you, Professor Troutt and Vice Chancellor Palmer. I also want to thank Terrence Griffin and Alex Brown, who handle alumni engagement for Rutgers Newark, and Marina Lopez of the Rutgers University Foundation. We invite all Newark alumni to visit Alumni Center, our beautifully refurbished historic building opposite the Newark Museum on the corner of Washington Street and Central Avenue, but once the immediate health situation has passed. Thank you and good evening.